don't let Broadcom control the negotiation. Bring them to the table early, tell them what you want to see. So you want to see prospective agreements, you want to see the order forms, you want to see pricing early.
Barry Pilling, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast. This is a bit weird, but obviously we know each other very well. But look, thanks for agreeing to do this, by the way.
That's all right. Thanks for having me on, Gareth. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we're going to talk about today.
Fantastic. Well, for the listeners who are unfamiliar with yourself, so obviously we both are part of Be Digital. You're our resident expert within the domain of ITAM, especially in relation to what we're about to talk about. But if you could just sort of set a bit of context, can you talk us through a little bit about your background, how you got into IT asset management, and sort of a little bit of a high-level overview of your career?
How I got into IT asset management is a bit of an odd story, actually. But I've been working in IT now for over 25 years, since I left the Royal Air Force in 2000. Well, I started off with software asset management and then into IT asset management for probably 16, 17 years now. I fell into it like a lot of people did of my era and generation, just purely accidentally. I was working in data centers for a large insurance company based in Norfolk. Got outsourced to a service integrator, and they were looking for someone to take responsibility for the software asset management function. And I was casting around for a new job, and I just said, I said to the recruiter, I said, will I be able to work from home occasionally? And they went, yeah, sure. I said, yeah, I'm in then. So
why not? I
had an interview with that service integrator's head of UK and Ireland ITAM service, or SAM services at the time. And she said to me at the time is, watch out, it's a very steep learning curve. And boy, was she ever right. It is a very, very steep learning curve. I found
and you've been climbing up that hill ever since, Barry.
Absolutely. Pushing the rock up the hill ever since. Yeah. And it's led me to some really, really great places. I've been lucky enough to work with some really huge organizations, and some small organizations. I've been lucky enough, during my consulting contracting career to work across most of the major software vendors. So, I've been quite fortunate to get to this position with a fairly broad and deep body of knowledge across all of the major data center vendors. So, yeah.
And obviously there was the seminal moment when you joined Be Digital for the second time, which was, more recently.
This is my first permanent job for well over a decade, apart from a brief period working for another consultancy. But it's been great. Obviously, as you say, I've worked with you guys previously before on a project basis, but actually coming in on a permanent basis has been a really good experience, and helping to build up the ITAM practice here and develop more junior colleagues here has been really good, really rewarding.
Absolutely. It's been fab to get you on board and work with you, Barry. So can we set the context a little bit? Can you tell the listeners a little bit about VMware, the Broadcom acquisition, and why that's important?
Yeah, so for those that are unaware, and I'd like to think that anyone in the ITAM industry or even the IT industry would be well aware of this by now. But
sure.
So in terms of my history of VMware, I've been working on VMware licensing for probably 13, 14 years or so now. I was asked to do a training course for it for Lisa about 8 or 9 years ago. It was the first course we put out for it, and I've just become a bit of an expert ever since then. It's gone from being kind of a hobby to really. It takes up most of my time now. I've got to be honest. But yeah, so obviously back in 2022, Broadcom announced that they were going to acquire VMware. It took around about 18 months to get through all of the regulators, because the Chinese regulators weren't happy about the potential risk of one of the world's biggest software vendors being bundled together with one of the world's biggest hardware vendors. The European Union looked at it. Our own Competition and Markets Authority looked at it. But eventually it was all signed off. So the acquisition went ahead in November 23. And then a month later, Broadcom announced a wholesale raft of changes. And the biggest one of those, obviously, was the switch from perpetual licensing to subscription licensing, and the withdrawal of support for perpetual licenses pretty much instantaneously. And that's kind of the crux of what we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely. And before we dive in, I just wanted to check, is that a Tottenham shirt on the wall behind you?
It is most certainly not. It is most certainly not. It's this is just the one shirt you can see. So that is a signed Lee Dixon.
I was going to say,
shirt.
I thought it was Lee Dixon. I could see the number
Lee,
2 there.
Lee Dixon. But what you can't see is a Tony Adams one there. There's a Charlie George one there. There's a Patrick Vieira one there. And I've got an England shirt in my office from 1966 signed by 10 of the team. So I'm a collector.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm a collector of signed sports memorabilia.
So for the listeners who don't know, Barry is a season ticket holder for Arsenal and is desperate that they don't throw it away this season like they did last season. But thanks for that. So look, before we get into the detail, why should CIOs and senior IT leaders care about this case at all?
So, I mean, Tesco versus Broadcom is potentially a landmark case. It's the first time Broadcom have been sued in English courts. So obviously it's in the High Court of England and Wales. And obviously there are some legal precedents in this country which are maybe a bit different from the United States or on the continent in Europe. So Tesco cited, they've made some fairly far-reaching allegations. Obviously, the first one, primary one, being breach of contract. They've also cited breach of competition law. Now, obviously, when we talk about competition law, I'm going to be referring to UK competition law, the primary driver of which is the Competition Act 1998. So whether there's any implications in other legal jurisdictions, I don't know, because I don't pretend to know anything about competition law overseas. I mean, what I will say as well, just to be very clear, I'm not a lawyer. So everything when we're talking about the laws, everything we're talking about legally today is my own research.
Of course.
And absolutely not to be taken as gospel truth, because it's possible I may make mistakes. But, I've done, of course. I do quite a lot of sort of corporate law research when it relates to software licensing. But it could potentially fundamentally change how software vendors do business in the UK, depending very much on what the court finds, which elements of Tesco's case it sees merit in and which elements of the case end up being dismissed potentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Of course. I mean, and we will come back to that, but I just go in setting a bit more context in term from a business IT standpoint. Can you just talk us through how virtualization became so strategically central to enterprise IT over the last sort of 20 years?
Yeah. I mean, I think first thing to remember is virtualization's been around for a long time on mainframes, for example. So, that's where early virtualization developed, where partitioning allowed for sort of different processes to be run concurrently on the same servers. I mean, what we call the x86 server virtualization boom. So, the boom on Wintel servers came in the early 2000s. And senior IT people, I think, started seeing the benefits of server virtualization. So, hardware resource optimization, cost efficiency, scalability, flexibility, all sorts of benefits to it. And VMware were one of the pioneers of that virtualization boom. They released their first hypervisors in 2001, and then vCenter Server followed a couple of years later, which gave you the ability to sort of manage multiple host servers with hypervisors running on them. It proved, I think, so popular because they put so much effort into research and development, and they were quick to market with so many of their technologies.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at some of the comparable technologies, I mean, Zen Server sort of first appeared in the early 2000s as well, but it's always been an open source project until Citrix purchased, I think it was Zen Source in 2008. Microsoft Hyper-V didn't appear until 2008. Nutanix wasn't founded until 2009. So a lot of the other comparable technologies weren't even around when VMware was making such great strides in the market.
Yeah.
And I think it's just grown from there, really. It proved to be a very popular platform. And it's become so entwined with enterprise IT. I mean, honestly, I've worked with a lot of clients over the last 16, 17 years, and I can honestly only think of one that didn't have a VMware footprint of any kind. And it was a very, very small client, a couple of hundred people, mainly reliant on Microsoft 365.
Yeah, it's ubiquitous, isn't it? But what I'm keen to sort of home in on is the level of dependency that certain organizations have on VMware, which is that a failure of governance in your eyes, Barry, or is that simply how enterprise IT has evolved?
I think it's much more the latter, to be honest. I mean, potentially we could sort of look at it now, where we talk about governance a lot, especially over the last few years, and retroactively apply governance standards. But I mean, it's probably how enterprise IT evolved. And as I say, VMware was the first to market and the quickest, and their technology's always been really, really good. I mean, even now, VMware technology tends to come out sort of head and shoulders above comparable virtualization technology. So I think it's just evolved that way. Strategies develop over time, don't they? And growth is often organic and piecemeal, depending on how businesses grow and the technologies that are available to them at any given moment. I mean, I think in my experience, historically, large organizations have tended to keep their eggs in one virtualization basket, for maybe want of a better metaphor. Certainly for mission critical applications, I mean, I think in all the years I've been working in SAM and ITAM, I mean, I've seen a few organizations that have diversified their virtualization footprint, but it's only ever on a small scale. You see small pockets of Hyper-V on customer footprints. You see maybe small pockets of XenServer or whatever, but it's never on a significant scale like VMware.
No, absolutely not. So let's maybe drill into the actual dispute then. So how did the dispute actually arise, Barry? What was the timeline of it?
So, I mean, the first thing we need to consider is who's involved in the dispute as well. So it's not just Tesco versus Broadcom. I mean, the supply chain in this instance involves Dell as the software distributor and Computer Center as the reseller. So there's four companies totally involved in it. So Tesco filed its suit in July last year, and they've named Broadcom and Computer Center as the defendants in its claim. So the dispute started effectively because Tesco had a 5-year enterprise license agreement with VMware, which was due to expire at the end of January just gone. So it was started in January 2021, due to expire this year. As part of the procurement of that agreement, the supermarket entered a contract with Computer Center to enable staggered payments, as the total ELA cost was over £20 million. Put it this way, it was a huge enterprise license agreement. And as part of that contract, there were some renewal provisions included, which gave Tesco preferential pricing for another 4 years of support for their perpetual licenses when the ELA expired. So effectively, from 2026 to 2030, they should have had another 4 years of support. Now, just to be clear, that was in the contract between Tesco and Computer Center. And a key part of Broadcom's defense is that, well, we never agreed that in the contract. So Tesco believed it had protected pricing for another 4 years, and they wanted to trigger that element of the contract with Computer Center. And basically, based on the claims and reading the legal filings, it looks like VMware was involved in the pricing for that contract and supported it. But as I say, it wasn't actually a party to that agreement. So Computer Center went to Dell, the distributor, with whom they had a contract, and in turn, they went to Broadcom to trigger this contracted rights that Tesco believes it has, only to be told by the vendor that the support for perpetual licenses is no longer available, and Tesco would have to buy subscription licenses, which include support. So there is a little bit more complex than that, but that's pretty much the basic case at this stage.
So obviously, the software supply chain is evolved to be in the way you just laid out. But I think actually let's talk about this. So Tesco is arguing that if the only difference is how you pay, support should continue. Is that the gist of Tesco's case, do you think? Why is Tesco arguing that if the only difference is how you pay, support should continue? Do you know what I mean? So is that what they're saying? Is that a fair reflection of what their case is built on, Barry?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think this is where the discussion around end of availability is so crucial. And it'll be really interesting to see what the High Court makes of this. So Broadcom is relying on a clause that appeared in the legacy VMware support and subscription contracts called end of availability.
This is the one you told me about.
Yeah, so this is where the discussion around end of availability is really critical to the case. It'll be interesting to see what the High Court makes of it. So Broadcom is relying in its defense on the clause that appeared in the legacy VMware support and subscription contracts called end of availability. So basically, this clause stipulated that the vendor had the right to retire any software or services at its discretion. And in its defense filing with the High Court, this is exactly what Broadcom has said. The support Tesco want is end of availability, so we can't offer it. Sorry. So Tesco's contention, and I'll be honest, I don't think it's unreasonable, is that said support isn't end of availability. And they're saying Broadcom simply wants customers to pay for it in a different way. So if you think about this, Tesco moved its entire VMware estate to Broadcom subscription bundles today, what would actually be different? So they would be running the same products, they'd be running the same versions, they would be getting exactly the same support, patch and upgrade availability that they got under the previous contract. So their argument is, well, how can you say something's end of availability when it's only the product SKU that's changed? Yeah. And that's the crux of that bit of the argument. So I suppose another way to think about it is agreement life cycles. So we've had lots of customers doing Broadcom renewals at different times, and I dare say we'll support a few more through the process. So Tesco's been told that the support it wants is end of availability, right? Yeah. But there will be other customers who haven't yet been through the renewal process who will still be receiving the support that Tesco has been told is end of availability. Yeah. So again, if you're providing that support to someone else purely because they're on a different life cycle with their contract, how can you say that support is no longer available? And it's not, as I say, it's not an unreasonable argument to put forward to the court. It would just be interesting, as I say, to see how the High Court views that interpretation.
I think a lot of these technology companies, their superpower is ambiguity, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not really built on increased overhead to deliver the service on their part like it is in other industries. SaaS is very much smoke and mirrors, isn't it? I mean, it feels a bit shady, really. Let's be honest. But but they've got to make money. But obviously, the margins they make is incredible, isn't it? So let's look at it from Broadcom's view. Then so they are saying there's no real difference between perpetual and subscription as you've laid out. So why is that such a critical industry argument in terms of the ramifications of this case?
I'll be honest. I think it's a disingenuous claim. That's just my opinion. I just think it's a slightly disingenuous claim because in their legal defence, what Broadcom has said is that the offer it made Tesco for its subscriptions includes the support it wants. So effectively, what's the problem? But this brings us to another one of Tesco's complaints, which is that Broadcom's attempting to force them to purchase subscription licenses they neither want nor need, as they already have perpetual licenses. So, and that is the key differentiator, because obviously, with the subscriptions from Broadcom, you are paying for brand new licenses to cover an estate that you've already licensed perpetually. And you're doing that just so you can get the support that Broadcom has denied you for your perpetual licenses. So I think if there is a vendor claim that actually there's no real difference between them, I think it's disingenuous at best. But I mean, for me, I'm just citing industry precedent here. So Broadcom, I think, has gone about this the wrong way. So, and I think it's reflective of how keen the leadership of the company is to drive revenue from the acquisition. Because I mean, let's not forget, VMware cost them nearly $70 billion. So it was a huge investment. Wow. Yeah. And they really do need to drive the revenue to pay for that. But let's take Microsoft as an example. So a good few years ago, Microsoft started incentivizing customers who were renewing enterprise agreements to go for Office 365 subscriptions rather than renewing support for on-premise Office, perpetual Office licenses. And the way they did it, instead of Broadcom, where they just said, no, you can't have that anymore, you've got to do this. Yeah. What they did is they offered preferential pricing. So, and you'll still see it on customer agreements now, where they had what's called a from SA Office 365 subscription. So that basically is where Microsoft have translated the value from the perpetual license and the support the customer was paying into a cheaper Office 365 subscription. And the deal is that you can take all of those across, because that's what you currently have, and you can have that many user subscriptions, but any new subscriptions you buy will be at full price. And customers accepted that change because in their eyes, Microsoft were playing fair. They were saying, well, actually, we're going to give you some credit because you've already invested for years in that software. So we're going to make the subscriptions cheaper for you for your existing user base. And they maintained that existing price all the way through their contracts. Obviously, price might go up by RPI, but they still get the value of that from SA subscriptions, they call it. And I think, that's the way Broadcom maybe should have gone about it.
Yeah.
But obviously, they chose not to. I mean, VMware, when they were VMware, it was after the announcement by Broadcom they intended to acquire VMware, but before the acquisition was finalized, they actually did something similar. They introduced a program called the Subscription Upgrade Program in August 2022. And what they did is they allowed customers to upgrade perpetual licenses and support for products like vSphere, vCenter, ARIA Suite, that sort of stuff, to subscriptions. And again, it was for preferential pricing. So they would give you a credit against the investment you'd already made, and you would get better pricing for the subscriptions if you went that way. Now, in Broadcom's big announcement in December 2023, they said at the time, and we maybe can find the link for this, they said customers would get a credit against their perpetual licenses. Now, to the best of my knowledge, no customer has ever actually been offered any preferential pricing against their existing license base. But the problem is it's really, really difficult because it's always been VMware's practice, and it is Broadcom's now that they've acquired VMware, they don't actually break down the pricing by line item in an agreement. So when they make you an offer, it's effectively, that is the price of the agreement. That's the cost of the agreement. There you go. And VMware also always did that as well. So where there are price increases, and Tesco have claimed that going into Broadcom subscriptions would cost them nearly 250% more than the comparable costs if they carried on with their existing support. You can't really tell if a customer's actually getting any credit or any preferential pricing at all, because that price is not broken down.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels a lot about this case is not really about licensing, is it? It's about support being used as leverage. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think. How exposed do you think organizations whose operational resilience depends on continued vendor support, how exposed are organizations, do you think, regardless of license ownership? Do you know what I mean? So is this ubiquitous in the industry?
That's a good question. I mean, it's happened. There's sort of similar things have happened before, where vendors will change things. I mean, we saw it, as I say, with the Microsoft example I was just given. As a general rule, I mean, with Office 365, initially with Microsoft, they were incentivizing customers. There was never a case of you can't have support for your perpetual licenses anymore. I mean, now at the point they don't do that now. I don't believe. I mean, it's been a while since I've touched Microsoft, to be honest. But there was never a case of, right, that's it, we've pulled up the drawbridge, you can't have that anymore. And I think with Broadcom, they have challenged the whole industry, really. I mean, customers are left, right, and centre. Yeah, I mean, and probably big enterprise customers who thought they would be with VMware for years and years and years. Yeah. I mean, let's look at the Tesco estate. In their claim, they've mentioned they have 40,000 VMs running on their VMware platform. Wow. And so they probably thought they would run them there forever. They support a lot of their critical business systems. And a lot of customers particularly the ones that can't afford to take Broadcom to court, are now in a position where they either have to just deal with it, they have to look at ways to migrate away to an alternative virtualization platform, or in some cases going for third-party support. So it has thrown the whole industry for a loop, really.
Yeah. Is there much third-party support available then out there? Is that a thing?
There's 3 companies, I think. Well, certainly 3 that I know of that offer third-party support for VMware.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think... it is good. It is really good, obviously, because, I mean, I know certainly one company has a lot of ex-VMware engineers. I mean, quite a lot of ex-VMware engineers, because Broadcom made a lot of guys redundant when they bought VMware. Mm. So there are really good options. The one downside to it is that you can't get version upgrades. Once you're out of support from the vendor,
of course,
any right of version upgrades and patches is gone. But I mean, again, in my experience, most customers run their VMware estates behind the curve anyway. We see lots of customers who are still running unsupported versions of the software. So as long as they have the patches and upgrades that they're entitled to downloaded before they come out of support, then they've still got themselves protected for quite some time.
Yeah. I spoke to a local authority yesterday, like the head of IT, and I brought up this issue, and they have VMware everywhere. And he just quite nonchalantly said, well, it's fine. We're just going to get rid of it. We're just going to use something else. But that's not an option for a lot of CIOs, Barry, is it?
No, absolutely.
It's so ingrained. What are the biggest barriers to getting rid of it and replacing it with another product then? Have you seen?
It depends on size and scale, doesn't it? As I say, VMware, Tesco's VMware estate, as I say, there's 40,000 VMs. Now, they have estimated, and again, included it in their legal filing, they have estimated it would take them between 3 and 5 years to migrate completely away from VMware, which actually I don't think is unreasonable, because when you're running a lot of mission critical applications, for example, with Tesco, VMware underpins all of the software that power their tills. So if you can imagine if there was a problem on that front and all their tools went down, that would cause so many potential issues for them as a supermarket,
Yeah.
So I think it does depend on size. I mean, Gartner did some research last year or the year before where they suggested it could cost anything up to $2,000 per VM to migrate, depending on alternative platforms you're looking at, how they were licensed, how big your estate was, how much you had to re-engineer your applications on a new estate, all that sort of stuff. So, but if you apply that, I mean, as I say, they said between $200 and $2,000. So even going for the worst case figure, $2,000 per VM for 40,000 VMs is a lot of money.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think for the bigger customers, it is difficult. I think for smaller customers, it's less of an issue. It's more realistic. And I think I've also seen some customers as well that will take like a 1-year renewal just as a holding position and then use that year to get themselves away from VMware so they don't have to renew again.
Yeah. So just correct me if I'm wrong here, Barry, but VMware is a pretty dominant player in the global virtualization market, isn't it? I've read 50 to 70% of the marketplace. Is that realistic? Is something like that, would you say?
It's difficult to say. And it is that the dominance in the market is really important to Tesco's case. I would say, somewhere. I've seen most analysts put it somewhere between 50 and 70%. So I don't think that's unreasonable to say that. I mean, I would argue that that's probably going down a bit now because of customers leaving.
Yeah,
VMware, thanks to what Broadcom have done.
But that's what I was going with. It was, how much is market dominance a factor in this case compared to a normal licensing dispute?
Oh, it's potentially enormous because of the fact that Tesco probably feel a little bit trapped because, as I say, they reckon it'd take them 3 to 5 years to get away from VMware. I think, that, as I say, their ELA was due to expire January 2026. I recall reading in the filing that they tried to execute their 4-year extension. They believe they had 18 months prior. So it's not like they left it to the last minute. It was a good 18 months to 2 years before the end of the agreement when they tried to execute the extension. And obviously already, by their own estimation, that's not enough time to get off of VMware for them. Yeah. So VMware's dominance, I mean, it comes back to what we were saying earlier about their innovation and the way they've invested so heavily in research and development. They have ingrained themselves as one of the world's most critical enterprise IT applications or software platforms, So
yeah, of course.
I think it is a huge factor because obviously Tesco are looking at it going, well, we don't really have many alternatives or any alternatives. Whereas normally with a software vendor and a licensing dispute, if you're unhappy, generally speaking, there will be an alternative available. It might take you time to get away from it and re-engineer depending on what the software is and who the vendor is. But I would argue it's probably easier than having to re-platform your entire virtual server estate.
So what kind of precedents have been set on this? Do you know much? I know there's been cases previously, overseas with AT&T in America, the Dutch Water Ministry in the Netherlands. What do those cases tell us, Barry, about this? So how does it impact this case?
Yeah, I mean, the AT&T and the Dutch Water Ministry cases are actually reasonably similar to Tesco's argument. I think, AT&T, I think, were actually the first company to sue Broadcom. And their case was very, very similar to Tesco's. They alleged breach of contract by Broadcom. They said that Broadcom failed to honour their renewal rights for support on perpetual licenses. They also claimed that the shift to subscription licensing and the price increases resulted in an anticipated increase in costs of around about 1,000%, which is horrifying when you think about it. And they sought what's called injunctive relief in law. So basically, they just wanted to force Broadcom to provide them with the support they wanted. The case was eventually settled out of court, but it was a confidential settlement. Now, I don't know what the law around that is in the United States or even the state concerned, and I don't know whether that will happen here because I'm not quite sure how that works. But yeah, it was a confidential settlement, so it was all kept very, very quiet. I suspect that was at Broadcom's request to try and head off further cases potentially. But I best guess, I think, is that there would have been some form of compromise between the two, and AT&T probably got a lot of what it wanted to otherwise they wouldn't have dropped the case, I don't think. So the Dutch Water Ministry's case, again, very similar. The projected increase in cost was a lot lower. It's something like 85-90%, I think. But the court in that case compelled Broadcom to provide 2 years support to the Dutch Water Ministry for their perpetual licenses. I think the key factor as well is they also imposed a potential penalty if Broadcom refused to do it. So I think it was 250,000 euros per day, and it was capped at 25 million euros. So if Broadcom refused to actually do what the court had ordered, there was a penalty imposed upon them for doing that. So I think both these cases, they indicate a precedent that courts are taking customer sides over support obligations. It remains to be seen, I think, whether the High Court in England will view the contractual relationship we've talked about, so the contract between Tesco and Computer Centre, and whether Broadcom actually has any obligations in that area in the same way. So we'll see how that goes. But it's an interesting one, no doubt.
Do you expect similar cases to emerge out, after this one? Then, do you think we're going to see a lot of this over the next couple of years against Broadcom, or do you think this is going to set a precedent that's going to shape things going forward?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think it depends what elements of the case the High Court finds merit in. Let's be honest. Primarily, Tesco are mainly interested in getting injunctive relief from Broadcom to give them the support they think they're entitled to. That is the primary element of their case. But I think depending on how the court finds on the various aspects, it could set some very compelling precedents that could potentially impact software vendors and customers with some really far-reaching consequences. I mean, as I say, we haven't really talked about it much so far, but Tesco have also cited breach of competition law. I won't go into that in depth because it is quite a challenging area of law.
Just maybe give us a high-level explanation of what you're talking about, Barry.
The two bits that they've alleged. So firstly, in the Competition Act 1998, there are a couple of sets of prohibitions called the Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 prohibitions. So Chapter 1 prohibitions basically prevent companies from colluding to price fix. And Tesco have alleged that that's what happened with Computer Centre and Broadcom, although they have actually said we have no knowledge of their exact contractual relationship and how things work between them. And then the other thing, the Chapter 2 prohibitions, which I think is the more interesting one, is abuse of a dominant market position. So Tesco are accusing Broadcom of taking advantage of their dominance in the market to charge customers who have very little choice in the matter some eye-watering price increases. So again, I think I'm not a legal expert, but I think there's potential merit in the latter one due to the size of the market share that VMware currently holds in the virtualization market. So I think it depends what happens. But if the High Court does find that Broadcom have breached competition law, and that is a big if, I mean, potentially opens up Broadcom to an investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority. So there could be some far-reaching consequences there. I think the bigger one is the end of availability. If the court finds in Tesco's favour on end of availability, we could see software vendors reviewing how they deal with end of life for their products and services, making sure there's changes in contracts, making sure that the language is explicit and less ambiguous. And also, we could then see if the High Court says, actually, Broadcom, you can't use that end of availability clause. That doesn't say what you think it says. We could find a lot of customers who've already gone through renewals coming back to the table, Broadcom, and saying, right, hang on. That you've sold us this agreement on a false pretense. So we want some form of, we want money back for that, and we want support for our perpetual licenses. And I think it'll also have a potential impact on supply chains. Again, if the court finds in Tesco's favour, we could see much more caution in contracts between vendors, distributors and resellers, and a layer of assurance that contractual terms for the customer are reflected all the way down the chain, which doesn't appear to be the case. And I say that without having seen any of the contracts between them all, but that doesn't appear to have been the case because, Tesco are saying, well, we had this contract with Computer Centre, and I think VMware played a role in it, but they were not a party to the agreement, and Broadcom are denying that they ever had an agreement in place that obligated them to provide that additional 4 years support.
So where is the case right now, Barry, and what are the sort of plausible next steps?
So at this stage, we've got four companies effectively standing and pointing fingers at each other. So there's four companies basically doing that. So Tesco filed its action last summer against Broadcom and Computer Centre. In October, both Broadcom and Computer Centre filed their defences. Computer Centre's defence is largely, it's not really our fault because we were compelled to act in the way that the vendor decided and the distributor told us. Broadcom's defence is pretty much, no, it's all nonsense. We don't accept any of this. I mean, some of it they've admitted to, but they haven't admitted to breach of contract. They haven't admitted to breach of competition law. And they, as I say, they continually rely on the end of availability clause in their defence. So that's where that is. But also what Computer Centre have done has filed what's called a Part 20 claim against Dell. So basically, as I understand it, what a Part 20 claim is so it sits alongside the main action. And if you are a defendant in said action, then the defendant in your Part 20 claim, basically, if the main action is found against you, you can then pass any relief that you're obligated for onto them. So what Computer Centre are basically saying, well, it wasn't our fault. We only acted in the way that Dell told us was possible. Yeah. So if you find against us, High Court, it's not fair that we pay. That should go to Dell. So, and I think Dell filed their defence for that in December. And then in January, Dell have now done exactly the same as Computer Centre. So they filed a Part 20 action claim against Broadcom. So what Dell are now saying, exactly the same as Computer Centre, that if the main case goes against them and Computer Centre get away with passing their obligation onto Dell, Dell should be allowed to pass their obligation onto Broadcom because they acted in the way that Broadcom told them to. Yeah. So, I mean, effectively, if it's all successful, what we're effectively saying is that, all the injunctive relief will be passed on to Broadcom and the reseller and the distributor will have no part of it, which, again, you can sort of understand that because Dell basically, they were told by Broadcom that support's not available, so they did what they were told. They passed it on to Computer Centre and Computer Centre said, well, we can't honour that contract because we've been told by the distributor that it's not possible.
Yeah, but in an era where the middleman is quickly or slowly in some cases getting phased out and there's a lot more direct to manufacturer, direct to vendor purchasing these days, I mean, surely this shines a light on an unnecessary supply chain. You're an unnecessarily long supply chain. I mean, you got the vendor to the distributor to the reseller to the end customer to the consumer of the license. Do you think people will look at this and go, do you know what? They're not adding much value. Let's just sell directly to end customers. What is the point of these middlemen? Do you think it's going to accelerate this trend? Do you think in the software industry?
It's a possibility. It is a possibility. I mean, me personally, and I'm going to be controversial here, I've never seen the point of the channel anyway. I suppose, I mean, let's be honest, I suppose part of it is pricing, isn't it? Because obviously the distributors as wholesalers buy licenses in bulk.
It's because there's so much margin, Barry. That's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But I mean, if a vendor, I mean, and you can buy directly from vendors. So for example, VMware used to have an online store where you could go and buy their products at list price. But obviously that was geared more towards low level purchases. If you wanted a couple of copies of vSphere, for example, and Microsoft, you can go and buy licenses direct from Microsoft, So it is possible. I think for volume purchasing though, there will continue to be a channel market because, as I say, I mean, by guaranteeing the orders, Broadcom will offer better discounts to the distributors, who will then offer better discounts to the resellers, who can then offer better discounts to the customers. So I think it will probably stay in place purely for pricing.
Yeah, there are other benefits of going through a reseller and a distributor. I'm just being a little bit. I'm just joking around a little
contrary.
Bit. Being a bit of a contrary. Not like me at all. But
no.
But yeah, I mean, it is definitely going to shine a light on this, though. I think, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the back-to-back contractual relationships, particularly.
Did you expect to see more organizations challenging vendors, or possibly resellers more openly? Or will sort of most absorb the change quietly, do you think?
It's an interesting one. I think the fact that Broadcom has taken this approach sort of speaks volumes about how confident vendors are in this space. I mean, I don't think that even if the court finds in Tesco's favour, I don't think it's going to lead to a change in vendor behaviour quickly. I think if Broadcom loses case, you would expect them to appeal the ruling. So it could drag on for quite some time. Yeah, I mean, because you think about it, above the High Court, you've got the appeal court, and if that rules against Broadcom, they could potentially take it to the UK Supreme Court. Whether they would or not, I don't know, but it is a possibility.
Yeah,
So, but it might just be the case that all Tesco want from Broadcom is support for long enough just to enable them to migrate away. And if they get an offer to that, they may just drop the rest of the case. Say, right, that's it, we're done. And then Broadcom will just carry on doing what they've been doing. So they may well let it go, not appeal it. They may be happy with that. Just saying, okay, because at the end of the day, if the court does find in Tesco's favour and Tesco get the support they wanted, Broadcom is still being paid for it, just not the amount of money they originally quoted.
Yeah.
So they're still getting paid. So let's see what happens. I don't think there will be any quick changes. Whether other customers will challenge vendors, I think it's a possibility. I think it really comes down to which elements of the case are found in Tesco's favour. I think the end of availability, if the High Court decides that is actually correct and Broadcom can't rely on that clause, I think that, as I say, that could lead to a lot of customers coming back to the negotiating table with Broadcom saying, right, in the light of that ruling, we're not happy about this. So let's see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, of course. So Barry, if the court sides with Tesco, what does that unlock for sort of CIOs and organizations in future negotiations?
So I think it really depends, as I say, on what aspects of the case the court finds in Tesco's favour. I mean, I suspect there will be elements of the case dismissed, but I wouldn't like to speculate on which ones. I think the key for me is definitely the end of availability clause. If the court finds that Broadcom has unreasonably and unfairly withdrawn support, and that comes back to a legal precedent known as the Braganza duty in English law. So it was set up and it was based on a ruling by the Supreme Court about 10 or 11 years ago in an employment law case, actually. But basically what it means is that where one party to a contract has the discretion to change elements of the contract, they must exercise that discretion in a reasonable way and in a fair way. And I think Tesco would argue that them suddenly saying that the support is end of availability and modifying the meaning of that clause is not in the spirit of the Braganza duty, as they call it. So I think if the court finds that Tesco's claim has merit in that regard, as I say, it could open up a lot of organisations coming back to Broadcom and telling them that, well, actually, we're not very happy. You told us we couldn't have this. The court has now found that you telling us was incorrect and unfair, so we want support. So it could have some really far-reaching consequences for Broadcom.
If you were advising a VMware customer now, and I know obviously every organization is different, but in general terms, what would you sort of advise them? What steps do you think they should take to reduce exposure to future licensing shocks from Broadcom?
It's all about ITAM maturity, isn't it? I mean, most organizations that have mature SAM and ITAM practices,
and that's where B Digital come in.
Absolutely, we can help there. We can certainly help there. But I think most organisations that have mature in SAM and ITAM, if they have a good level of governance around the software, commercially astute enough, certainly with Broadcom, begin the negotiations early. There's no reason to think you can't get an equitable deal. Negotiating with Broadcom, it's like any negotiation. You have to ask yourself, what's your BATNA, as they call it? What's your best alternative to a negotiated agreement? Yeah. And then you have to make sure you have enough time available to execute that alternative if you don't get the deal you want. Because that's the way you get Broadcom to offer you maybe the pricing or the deal that you want. Obviously, if you do move away from Broadcom, it could potentially lead to audits. But again, if you're mature and confident in your position, you've got nothing to fear from that. And I think that lesson can be applied to all software vendors. It's all about start early. Make sure you have an alternative. So if you can't get the deal you want, what are you going to do about it? And it's got to be something that's realistic. Yeah. And it's got to be a threat that the vendor will take seriously. Otherwise, they'll never offer you preferential pricing. Now,
sure.
With Broadcom, you could say to them, if I don't get the price I want, we're going to walk away. We're going to go third-party support. We're going to migrate to a new platform, whatever. So it's key that you have the time to actually execute that change.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. It's rational. Can I just put another spin on that, though, as well? If you were advising, let's say, a CIO and a head of IT or, a senior manager within an organization who was starting like a VMware review today, what would you tell them to do and what would you tell them not to do?
So what I would tell them to do, firstly, is be all over your estate. Now, I mean, one of the great things about VMware is VMware admins are generally all over their VMware estates. They know what the estate looks like. It's actually relatively easy to get data on your estate as well. There are tools out there that enable you to quickly gather data. Yeah. But make sure you're all over it. Make sure you know what your roadmap is. How entwined are you with VMware as a platform? How important is it that you keep that platform? And then make early plans. So get on it early, get all over it. And in terms of actually when it comes to like shaping the estate, I mean, we always recommend optimizing workloads where possible as well. I don't think I've ever seen a customer VMware estate that didn't have ESX host servers sitting there largely doing nothing, and we always say, look, if that workload, if that host isn't really running huge workloads, why are you not consolidating your VMs? Because you're licensing it on physical cores, when you move to Broadcom. So the fewer hosts that you have, the lower your renewal costs are going to be. So seriously look at optimizing your estates. And in terms of what not to do, firstly, don't let Broadcom control the negotiation. Bring them to the table early, tell them what you want to see. So you want to see prospective agreements, you want to see the order forms, you want to see pricing early. Now, Broadcom will say to you, well, we can't do pricing until you've given us some data to show us what your estate looks like. That's fine. What they will do is ask you for RV Tools data. So for those that don't know, RV Tools is a free tool that you can run against your vCenters, and it gives you every single bit of information conceivable about your VMware platform. So you don't want to give Broadcom that because, it could have data in there you don't want them to see. It could have confidential data in there you don't want them to see.
Sure.
But all you need to give them is details of the servers and their core counts and their geographic locations to enable them to apply the licenses correctly. So only give them the data that they actually need. And obviously, if you're not sure what they actually need, come and speak to some specialists like us, and we can help you with that.
So Barry, with Dell now filing a Part 20 claim against VMware, does this move the case beyond what initially looked like a dispute with a single customer?
I think before we actually answer that question, what we need to do is just examine what a Part 20 claim is, because we kind of touched on it in the other element of the podcast we recorded. So basically, in English civil law, in the rules of civil procedure, a Part 20 claim is basically, so if you're being sued and you believe that another party has the liability. So, for example, if the reason you're being sued wasn't something you could do much about because you're beholden to another party, then effectively you can file a Part 20 claim, which really puts the liability, if any liability is found against you, it puts the liability onto that party, provided the court agrees with your claim. So in this instance, where we have, for example, Tesco have sued Computer Centre and Broadcom, Computer Centre said, well, actually, it wasn't our fault that you couldn't get that support. That was Broadcom's decision. But they then have to go to the next party in the chain, which is Dell. So they filed a Part 20 claim against Dell. Dell have in turn now filed a Part 20 claim against Broadcom, saying, well, you know what, this isn't actually our fault. This is Broadcom's fault because we're all beholden to Broadcom in this process. So I don't think it's ever, once Tesco sued Computer Centre, I don't think it was ever a sort of just a straightforward commercial dispute, because there's so many moving parts, so many elements to this as well. I mean, I think it's the first time a reseller has been a co-defendant in the many cases that have been filed against Broadcom internationally. And as we said previously, this is the first one that's actually been filed in the High Court of England and Wales as well. So, but I think Computer Centre and Dell have made it more complicated by ensuring that all parties in the supply chain are now involved legally. So it is quite a complex situation now.
Oh, absolutely it is. Yeah, no, of course. So given Dell's role then as one of VMware's largest distributors, does its involvement add weight to the fairness argument, or is this still largely about how the contracts have been drafted?
I think it's a little of both, being completely honest. One of the most interesting aspects of Dell's case against Broadcom is that they have now effectively taken Tesco's side in the argument. In Dell's claim, they've basically accused Broadcom of not honouring a quote that VMware sent to them, which specifically included the additional 4 years of support that Tesco's claimed it's entitled to. So in its filing, Dell's mentioned VMware's authorised distributor partner program, of which it was a part, and the agreement that governed it. So we'll just call it the ADPA, ADPPAs. It's a bit of a complex one. So according to Dell, the quote is governed by the terms of that partner agreement. And the quote itself specifically identified Tesco as the customer, Computer Centre as the reseller, and Dell as the distributor. And it also apparently is noted as a final quote, and includes a schedule of all services agreed between VMware, Tesco, and the supply chain. So Dell's contention is therefore that this created a contractual obligation on VMware to deliver all of the quoted services, and Broadcom has breached it. So I think it adds a lot more weight to the whole fairness element of the case that Tesco's made. But at the same time, it is still effectively, I think this whole case could see a major shake-up in the way contracts are drafted between the parties in the supply chain.
So, in your humble opinion, Barry, has Broadcom's response changed the tone or the direction of the case in any meaningful way?
I'm glad you said humble. I do try to be. Honestly, not really, I don't think. I mean, Broadcom has continued to deny any contractual link between itself and the additional 4 years support that Tesco have requested. They're also continuing to rely on the end of availability clause, which we've touched on previously, which I don't actually think covers them the way they think it does. And they've stuck to that defence throughout everything, all of the proceedings so far, all of the countersuits to Part 20 claims and whatever. So I don't think they'll move away from it now.
Yeah, no, I agree. But sort of taking a step back then, is this becoming a broader challenge around market power and licensing control, or do you think it just remains a typical commercial dispute?
I think it's got the potential to cause a huge ripple effect across the software licensing industry. It's one of those that could cause huge problems. And it's interesting as well, actually, because Tesco in their, I think it was in their response to Broadcom's defence, cited all of the cases that have been filed against Broadcom internationally as an example of their behaviour in this regard. So I think potentially that's now introducing all of those cases to the High Court, and Tesco are saying, we need you to consider these as well as an example of where Broadcom are really trying to cause problems for their customers. So then you think about it, there's firstly, you've got the competition element. Now, Tesco has now dropped its claim around the Chapter 1 prohibitions of the Competition Act, which, if you remember, is the element that bars collusion between companies on the same level in a supply chain, price fixing, all of that sort of stuff. So sure. Tesco said, okay, in light of further evidence received in Computer Centre's defence, we're dropping that. But they're continuing to push on the Chapter 2 prohibition, which is the one that bars abuse of a dominant market position. And Tesco's argument is that, the renewal quote they had from Broadcom was nearly 250% higher than the cost they should have been paying under the 4 year support they were entitled to. And given the fact Tesco have got 40,000 VMs on their VMware platform and said it could take us 3 to 5 years to get away from this, and Broadcom know it could because it's also business critical, they're arguing. And it is hard to argue that that's not abusing their position because they know they've got Tesco locked in as a customer, and then to give them a quote which is just such inflated pricing, it's a really interesting argument, and I think it's quite a strong case as well. But that's me speaking, and I'm not a legal expert, but it's just the way it looks to me from reading all of the filings. So, and then secondly, I think it's the end of availability as well. So I mean, Tesco's claiming that Broadcom have not actually retired any services, which again, when you look at it logically, they haven't. What they've done, it doesn't matter whether you've got perpetual licenses with legacy support or you've now transitioned into subscriptions, you're getting the same support for the same platform. If you sort of renew your agreement at that point, you're not actually fundamentally changing the support you're getting. They still continue the support. They're just changing the way that you pay for it. So Tesco are arguing that actually it was a commercial decision to repackage the services. It's not an end of availability. It's not a retirement. And it's really hard, again, to argue against that when you read the end of availability clause that Broadcom is actually relying on. And I think if the High Court finds in favour of Tesco on either or both of those points, I think it's going to leave Broadcom with a lot of problems because, if the court does decide that Broadcom have breached competition law, then obviously the Competition and Markets Authority, you would think, logically speaking, they have to get involved and investigate why they've breached the Act.
Sure.
And then the other side of it as well is if the High Court agree with Tesco's claim that the end of availability doesn't mean what Broadcom say it does, then potentially they're going to have a lot of customers wanting to revisit their renewal agreements and say, well, hang on a minute, you told us that we couldn't have that support and service because it had been retired. The High Court has now said that you're talking nonsense, so what are you going to do about it? So it could leave Broadcom with a lot of problems. I mean, I would say as well, obviously, because this
can of worms springs to mind, Barry, doesn't it?
I would argue as well for any international listeners that this will probably only apply to England and Wales because that's where the jurisdiction is for this particular hearing. But again, it could have ripple effects out to other jurisdictions depending on competition law and their rules of civil procedure, for example.
Barry, that is the perfect place to end this conversation. Thank you so much. It's been brilliant. I think I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners have as well. So thanks for talking us through the main elements of this intriguing case. We will watch and listen out for what unfolds before us as this comes to a conclusion. But look, thank you so much, Barry. It's been great talking to you. Where can people find you, follow you, etc.? To see how this progresses, and also other things around ITAM. Where can people reach out to you and find you?
So you can always reach me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/IN/Barry Pilling, or just search my name. It's a fairly unusual name. So generally, if you search for me in the UK, you'll find me fairly quickly. Or obviously, come and look at our website to see what services we can provide, bdigitaluk.com.
Absolutely. And you recently did a video with Computer Weekly, didn't you, with Cliff Saran, and I know he references you in a lot of his articles. Another great source to stay up to date with this case. But yeah, thanks so much, Barry. Thanks for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.